Chris, did you not try and mess with the voting in the cat mayor election?
The Horse Race is brought to you by Benchmark Strategies, Boston's leading public affairs and public relations consulting firm. To learn more, connect with Benchmark on LinkedIn at Benchmark Strategies or visit benchmark-strategies.com. Welcome back to The Horse Race, your weekly look at politics, policy, and elections in Massachusetts. I'm Steve Koczela, president of the Massing Polling Group, here with Jennifer Smith of CommonWealth Beacon, and it is Thursday, January 8th. A quick programming note here at the top. We are, of course, aware of all the developments happening on the international scene. We will be focusing on that next week, but this week we're going to focus here in Boston and on Beacon Hill. Today, the state legislature is back in session and ready to tackle the new year with their usual mix of eagerness and productivity. All right, Jen, it is our first pod of 2026, so first and foremost, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to me, who will be incorrectly writing 2025 on literally everything until at least April.
Yeah.
How long does it take you to adjust?
I think it's sort of a legislative year thing, although that would mean you had to start writing 2026 like 6 months ago. So it's something like that where I take no responsibility for the year.
That's absolutely fair. That's true. It's always like, you got the fiscal year, so we had to be saying 2026 last year, but no normal person talks about fiscal years. So we're just in a difficult spot as both, men of the people and also men of Mapley.
I feel like somehow you just called us abnormal, which probably is fair. But anyway, as the new calendar year began, there was some intrigue at City Hall that generated some headlines, some intrigue, some banter or comments on social media, and the end result of it was kind of a surprise City Council president.
The clerk has tallied the votes as cast, and Councilor Braden is our new council president.
So the takes that I've heard are people are talking about kind of what that means for Michelle Wu, newly reelected, newly resworn in, whether we should have seen this coming, et cetera. So Jen, you follow this stuff super closely. What was your take on all this?
The short answer is we have a new council president, Liz Braden, who said that as she accepted the nomination that she, quote, didn't know she would be standing here yesterday as the council split 7-6 in her favor. So this basically capped off some very classic parochial Boston maneuvering and behind the scenes jostling for what is, I would like to emphasize, largely a ceremonial position unless the mayor of Boston happens to be, leaving to become labor secretary or something.
Okay, tell us what you mean by that, because for those of us who don't spend our time in the Boston City Council chambers, it sounds important. City Council president sounds like an important job.
Yeah, you would be forgiven for that. So
Thank you.
We're doing great. So Happy New Year. All of our brains are doing great and the city council is doing great. So basically, the city council president, has the most staff power, has kind of more budget than everyone else, gets to preside over the meetings. There is basically kind of the bully pulpit element of it. It can often be considered kind of a launching platform for any city councilor that wants to then, for instance, pursue higher office. Mayor Michelle Wu, notably, was city council president due to some classic horse trading back in the day. But, and my allusion to becoming labor secretary here is because city council president as an actual functional position really only becomes very important when there is no longer a mayor. So this is not a system where, say, Mayor Marty Walsh at the time goes to become Joe Biden's labor secretary. That means there's a special, seat that needs filling here, a special election that needs having. But before that election can happen, somebody has to be acting mayor. And it is not, for instance, the person who got the highest number of votes at the at-large race that most people in Boston voted for after the mayor. It is the person who the city council kind of arbitrarily voted to be council president at the time that the mayor leaves. So that could be, a district councilor that only a small proportion of the city voted for, but they become interim mayor of Boston. So that's one of the only reasons that the city council president matters, aside from the ability to, kind of flex all over Boston with the power of being the city council president.
Got it. And as you note, that has happened before. So, not out of the question that Michelle Wu could be bound for some other position, elected or appointed. So good to know that is how that whole thing works. Our good friend Rich Parr, many time guest, sometimes host of this here podcast, said that we must use the phrase Irish hello to describe this surprising and sort of unannounced city council president that we have now.
Thank you, everyone. I want to express my deep gratitude to my colleagues and fellow councillors for their support. It is an honour of my life to work for the people of Boston and serve alongside all of you in the Boston City Council. It is a privilege to serve as it will be my privilege to serve as the next Boston City Council President.
So, Jen, it was a surprise, kind of like an Irish goodbye would be. Tell us how this actually happened.
So Boston is what's known as a strong mayor style of government here, where the mayor essentially has almost all of the power. And that can mean that the city council, if enough sort of mayoral loyalists end up on the council, can be considered as sort of a rubber stamp or perceived as a rubber stamp for the mayor. But Michelle Wu has been dealing sort of with disgruntled factions. So not just the more moderate bloc that you might expect to be angsty at the progressive mayor, but also notably Julia Mejia, who is considered one of the more progressive members, but has taken issue with the Wu administration as well. So it looked initially like a Wu ally was going to be poised to be the new council president, but she unexpectedly withdrew her candidacy. And then another councillor was proposed as a compromised pick between the Wu bloc and the Wu critics bloc, and that seemed to have conditional support from enough councillors. But then there was late night horse trading. And I do mean late night. Braden told reporters after the announcement that she would be council president that two councillors came to her home the evening before, urging her to consider the post. And literally less than 24 hours later, she was elected council president 7-6. So there was an entire kind of shell game swap around here. And I would just like to say that whether or not this is weird or unusual or silly or a waste of everybody's brain power or time is also something that's kind of debated among counselors. Like, it is known that pretty consistently the council president position is just sort of a political alignment pick. It depends on who's giving good committee positions to other counselors. It depends on whether or not you're trying to kind of keep the council aligned with the mayor's priorities, or whether you want to be kind of an independent check on the mayor. So all of that has always been true. There have been notable council presidency picks for sort of these pseudo-political, pseudo-personal advantageous reasons before, but this is a particularly silly situation for plenty of people in that we thought we knew who the council president would be, then there's an alternative, and then 24 hours later there is an alternative. So congratulations to Liz Braden and her gentle Irish accent for the Irish hello of the council presidency.
Together with the City Council and the members of the Mayor Wu's administration, I'm confident that we can meet this moment, strengthen our democracy, and continue building a Boston that truly works for all. Thank you.
Well, I, for one, like the idea that it involved horse trading, just because we approve of all things horses and politics, especially when they are mixed. That is what we've got for you for City Council shenanigans this week. We also have our good friend Chris Lisinski here to talk about the legislature. So, Jen, should we move on to that?
Let's do it. Let's head up the hill.
It's a new year and the legislature is back in session. Where they are in the calendar puts extra pressure on them to deal with a host of important issues. But as our next guest wrote, legislative leaders are far from accomplishing the goals they set for themselves. So, how to get there from here? How to summit the mountain of legislative accomplishment that they are about to set out on? Here to chart the course for us is Chris Lisinski of CommonWealth Beacon. Chris, welcome back.
Steve, I'm happy to be back, but I'm disappointed that you set up this mountaineering metaphor and did not award me a title.
Oh, well, wait, because we actually counted, and by our count, you have now been on the pod 5,000 times. which means that you get one of our exclusive collector's lapel pins or beer koozies. So after the recording, please stop by the merch shop to redeem the certificate.
I feel like we should have gone with a carabiner or something. Like, stick with the metaphor. I agree with Chris on this. We got to stick to a theme.
The Sherpa of legislative shenanigans. How about that?
I love that. Chris, do you approve?
Yeah, I'm putting that in my official bio.
But in all seriousness, you had a very thorough piece about what the state legislature has left to do for themselves. And it seems weird to say left to do because for the average person, it seems like the start of the year. So let's set the scene in that sense, which is where are we in the actual schedule as we kind of kick off what to most people looks like the beginning of a new year?
Legislative terms in Massachusetts are 2 years, so we're about halfway through in that sense. That being said, it's pretty common, and I think it's even normal at this point, for the legislature to do most of its serious legislating in the 6 months, 7 months between January in the second year and the end of July in the second year. So we are now entering really what is going to be the meat of the 2-year term. Of course, there were things that happened in 2025, and there are always things that happen in year one, but this 7-month span in year 2 is the biggest, the most significant for lawmakers. And you can see that they buy into that just by how many of the priorities they set for themselves are still pending as 2026 kicks off.
I was thinking about that in terms of kind of what the first year represents. In a lot of ways, it's sort of hashing out what those priorities are even going to be for the second year. There's, a huge flood of bills. There's kind of a lot of discussion about how bad everything is. Of course, we need to deal with budgets and bond bills, and all of that stuff very much gets rolling during that first year. But as we might recall from, I'm going to crib from you a little bit, Steve, here, which is like this 30-car pileup that we recall from last end of 2-year session. It really does feel sometimes like they leave a lot of stuff to the end. But of course, their argument, right, Chris, is that, well, they've been working on it consistently. And, this stuff is designed to have kind of a 2-year arc to it. So that's sort of how they think about it.
Yeah, they definitely would say that work has been taking place and that legislative work involves more than just putting a bill on the floor and voting on it. And there's some merit to that. There have been hearings for months and months now on virtually every topic you can think of that the legislature will need to tackle. More significantly, there have been meetings happening behind closed doors between legislative leaders and rank and file members and the lobbyists who hold great sway on Beacon Hill. So year one is very often about getting the pieces organized and laid out on the table, and then year 2 is when they actually start to move.
And let's talk about then what those pieces actually are, because you lay out some of the policy areas that they're planning to tackle, which there's a lot of big stuff on there. You noted the budget, housing, energy, and healthcare, which all 4 of those are in, I think, a state of crisis, it's fair to say, in various ways, for various reasons, not even most of which are the legislature's own making, and a lot coming from the Trump administration, for example. So what do they do first? How do you attack the legislative priority list when you've got 4 such huge issues to deal with?
I think we can safely say that what will start to move first, what will emerge first, is the budgetary approach. Part of that is because of the calendar and rules that are baked into the calendar. Governor Maura Healey has to file her proposal for the next year's annual state budget by January 28th. Granted, that's going to be pending for months. There will be many, many hearings about the governor's spending proposal. Tradition is the House rolls out its rewrite in April, the Senate rolls out its rewrite in May, and then there's closed doors negotiations. So it will be quite a while before the next year's annual budget is actually in place. But those conversations will really erupt into the spotlight, into public view, as soon as the end of this month. It's always a tricky topic, but this year is going to be even more so. I feel like we say that every year, but this time it really is true because the reconciliation package that President Trump signed last year is projected to slash state tax collections by nearly $1 billion this year and next year combined. That is money that budget writers are going to have to find somewhere else, come up with from somewhere else, whether that's increasing taxes and levies here or trimming from services that have become really popular at this point.
So on the subject, though, of that revenue dip that we've been anticipating, and you've been covering kind of the discussions around how the lawmakers involved are trying to grapple with that, kind of both getting their arms around the scale of the issue, but then also, where could we find more money? What can we pull from? Don't say the words rainy day fund out loud, everyone kind of recedes into themselves. So I know it's not kind of exploding out in terms of an actual practical budget proposal from the governor right now, but has there been kind of any murmuring around what we might expect them to try and horse trade on, or is it all just kind of a black hole at this point?
It's largely a black hole. I think what we can say is an area being pushed by folks outside Beacon Hill pretty consistently. The exact way to describe it is interesting only to accountants and those who work in the CPA field, but there's a pretty substantial push from folks like the Raise Up Coalition to decouple the state's tax code from the federal tax code. What that means essentially is that all of the federal tax changes that went into effect through this reconciliation package will hit Massachusetts because of the way our tax law lines up with the federal law. Theoretically, lawmakers could change it here at the state level, keep more money flowing in, and essentially negate some of these cuts that the federal government has authorized. Obviously, there's a risk to that. You can almost certainly expect a pretty major pushback to the idea of decoupling from business groups in particular. But that is one area where lawmakers are under a lot of pressure from influential figures on the left of center to make a change and keep more money in state government's pockets.
And one of those areas that we need to spend that money on, of course, is healthcare. It was already expensive. It already was in need of a lot of reform even before this new administration came in. But we should probably circle back on this topic that we've had you on here before, which is healthcare funding in crisis, in part because, again, of federal moves. So where are we at on that right now?
Mass Health, which is the state's combined Medicaid and children's health insurance program, is bracing for massive changes in the years ahead because of that reconciliation package, changes it makes to eligibility, work requirements, and how the state enforces it. The early estimates are that is going to affect hundreds of thousands of people in Massachusetts, essentially eliminate their eligibility for mass health coverage and reduce money that the state gets from the federal government to help cover mass health. Then there are all sorts of downstream effects that will come from that. If someone loses health insurance coverage, their health needs don't go away. They just wind up going to the emergency room without insurance coverage, and that money gets passed along somewhere else down the pipeline, likely through the safety net program. So the fact that caseloads and enrollment at Mass Health has stayed pretty high and is bound for major upheaval in the years ahead, thanks to the federal government, is just undoubtedly going to create a budget migraine of its own for the state on top of all of the other factors that we've already discussed.
One note on that I would probably slightly take exception to, Chris, is that I would say get our money back from the federal government, just because we send more money than we get. And I think sometimes it gets cast as like we're getting somehow like charity or something like that, when in fact we send more money than we get back. So it feels a bit, to me, as a taxpayer and as a person, a bit weird to be thinking that we need somehow to be funded by the federal government to do things which we ourselves are already funding and then some. Anyway, that's just, I'll get off my soapbox now on that. I do have another question on healthcare, so here we go. Another topic in this is one that we're all very familiar with if you have a primary care doctor, as I assume most people listening to this podcast probably do, but you may have noticed it's harder to get a doctor if you move. It's harder to get an appointment if you have a doctor, because we're in the midst of what I think could be fairly be called a primary care crisis. So I know the legislature is taking a look at that. How are they addressing it?
How are they addressing it is an open question. But one strategy that is gaining momentum in the Senate and among Governor Healy in particular, is reinvigorating the primary care sector by requiring more healthcare dollars to go toward that instead of other segments of the industry like specialists and pharmaceuticals. There's growing interest in codifying that in legislation. A task force that the legislature created actually already delivered a recommendation that Beacon Hill enact a new law calling for doubling the share of healthcare dollars that go toward primary care or setting it at 15%, whichever is lower. That's something that could make a massive difference if it comes to pass. And it is also fuel for a major political battle because specialty care and pharmaceuticals are major industries that would earn less under this vision and therefore are just very, very likely to launch their own lobbying blitzes to fight that idea.
Okay, well, we have to turn over to housing because that's another one of the main topics that the legislature is covering. And not to put too fine a point on it, but basically the issue is we don't have enough of it. We don't have even close to enough of it. We're not building it anywhere near fast enough. And that shows up in different ways in different communities. And Jen, I'm going to turn over to you on this one because this is a topic about which you know more than any person on planet Earth, how housing works in Massachusetts. So what is the legislature considering when it comes to housing?
I'm going to tap Chris in on this if he wants to here because we talk about it all the time. And if you just say housing bond bill near us, you can watch our hair literally catch fire. So the topic of housing is complicated because, well, we are in a housing crisis. We have a million crises all at once here, but the kind of way that you address it can be kind of complicated. Lawmakers are still talking to and pointing to the housing bond bill from last year that on paper would authorize $5.6 billion in bonding power pointed toward housing. But of course, that full amount basically never gets spent. That's saying, if you wanted to pull this much money and put it toward housing, you could. So there are also maybe like 50 policy changes tucked inside of that, including, for instance, one to make accessory dwelling units. So those cute little individual units that you could build next to or as part of your existing home, building those as of right in areas that have typically been single family areas. And the reason that I say it's a little bit complicated here is, saying that's allowed now, saying that's legal doesn't just mean that there's suddenly a boom of new ADUs, that we don't just suddenly get, tens of thousands new units out of nowhere, because it's still very hard and expensive to build new housing in Massachusetts. So looking kind of ahead at this year, there are some plans for new financing options for people across income ranges to build ADUs, again, starting this year. There are state trackers now basically projecting how much every region needs to be building in terms of different housing. And there are some new initiatives that are kind of folding themselves into place this year. The one that I'll just shout out is seasonal communities regulations, which basically say that areas that have large proportions of kind of vacationers or seasonal use should have kind of a tailored set of tools that they can use to encourage new housing and make it easier for the people who live there to use it. And so that stuff is all kind of starting to roll into place, but like everything involving housing, we won't really know how it pans out for 5-10 years down the line.
And I'll just note the chatter at this point from outsiders and from insiders, from lawmakers, is that way more needs to be done on housing. What I have not heard is anywhere near a clear indication of what the next plan is to build on that borrowing bill and the reforms in it. So that is a true wild card as we head into 2026.
I think that's a really sound point, Chris, because, there's more than 100 bills this session. I was kind of taking a brief scan that touch on housing. And so some of these might be things like YIGBY bills, which I wrote about before the holiday, which is an acronym for Yes in God's Backyard, which would make it easier for religiously owned parcels to build larger unit counts on their property. So there's kind of things about like, what do we do with the land that we currently have? But then also kind of smaller things like, right to counsel policies if you're a tenant. So housing as a subject is pretty broad, pretty attenuated, but there isn't really an indicator that there is kind of a single big swing again. So that's true kind of if you're looking at the actual bills themselves and based on kind of the way that administration officials have been talking about it. It's kind of hard to just push everything through at once. And we're still waiting for the MBTA community's fight to wind its way through the courts again.
There's way more to talk about on that and way more details, and we could do multiple podcasts and definitely will about each one of those topics. We do have to move on to energy because that's one where it seemed for years like Massachusetts was kind of pushing in a direction toward more green energy policy, more green energy developments. And then the Trump administration seems like they're against pretty much all of that. Like almost as a rule of thumb, if it's green energy, the Trump administration is against it. So how is the legislature, first of all, I guess, do you think that's a fair characterization? Second of all, what can the Massachusetts legislature actually do about that?
Yes, I think that's generally a fair characterization. And what can the legislature do about it? Not all that much. And I think they are still searching for the answer. We saw late last year the House's point person on energy matters for this term use an energy affordability bill that Healy filed as a vehicle to try and roll back or soften some of the decarbonization requirements for 2030 that are baked into state law. The bill would not have outright eliminated it. It would have kept in place the 2050 goal of getting to net zero emissions. And the House ultimately backed away from that plan after getting some blowback. But just that action alone, I think, symbolized the real swamp that lawmakers find themselves in. It's been years of committing to green energy, viewing it as the future of Massachusetts. And now that future is proving far more difficult to achieve than once thought, largely because of the Trump administration, lawmakers are in a weird position where they need to ponder a retreat of sorts, or at the very least, a strategic hard left turn.
All right, Chris, well, it was great to see you for this, your 5,000th appearance here on the horse race, earning you both a commemorative pin and a Lifetime Achievement Award. We will see you again soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll wait for the beer koozie to be my next reward.
I'm Zainab Asma-Doyle, Research Director at the Massing Polling Group. The Massing Polling Group serves the region's leading foundations, political groups, government entities, and businesses. Our surveys and focus groups bring high-quality data to the toughest questions facing society today. Learn more at massingpolling.com.
And that brings us to our final segment, which this week is brought to you by our decision desk here at the Horse Race Global Media Empire headquarters. We have a race to call, mostly because everybody else has called it, and we saw a story both on Reddit and on NBC Boston. It is that Minerva, the cat, one of the cats, I don't know, that ran for the Somerville Bike Path cat mayor, has won the election. Right, Jen? Is that what the story is?
Well, I'll note here that this was in fact called in September. We are very belated on this actual election here, but I mean, we had to talk about it because we naively spent our time discussing what it meant for Democrats to be winning in Virginia and New Jersey, and not what it meant for a long-haired black cat named Minerva to win on a crime platform to be mayor of a bike path in Somerville. And like, are bad, you guys. Are bad.
And I should also note that when you say a crime platform, it's because her sign literally just said crime.
Yeah, that's also how I read.
It didn't say stop crime. It didn't say we're going to fight crime. It just said crime. So anyway, that race has been called. Somehow, even though she came in third place in the voting, she's been declared the winner. Somebody on Reddit actually had a pretty good explanation, which is, I think it's a, quote, head of state versus head of government thing. Minerva is the head of state. She provides the symbolic persona of the path, whereas Barry and Orange Cat are the heads of government who actually rule the path day to day. Personally, this writer says, I follow Barry's edicts on the basis that I see her more often. So there you go.
I find it very interesting that ultimately it came down to 3 cats when I am told, looking back at this earlier coverage here from NBC Boston, that there at one point was a parrot, a guinea pig, a snake, and a tortoise vying for the title, and I just want to know what the cat lobby has been doing.
Well, I think the title was Cat Mayor, so I think that was probably the basis on which the others were disqualified.
I really think Ms. Potato the guinea pig should be allowed to be cat mayor of this path.
Anyway, that one has wrapped up. So if Minerva was your candidate, then congratulations. We are sorry that we were so late in calling that. Our decision desk wanted to be sure that every vote was counted and had some elaborate statistical calculations that they needed to run, which they have now wrapped up, and that's our projection. That is, fortunately for all of you, all the time we have for today. I'm Steve Koczela, signing off with Jennifer Smith. Our production and theme music is done by Charlie Koczela. You can write to us at thehorseracepodcast@gmail.com if you have an animal mayor of some specific piece of infrastructure that you'd like to suggest. Don't forget to give The Horse Race a review wherever you're hearing us now. Subscribe to CommonWealth Beacon's daily download and reach out to us here at the Massing Polling Group if you need polls or focus groups done. For now, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.